Unfortunately, I see a lot of organizations not following through on the promises that the marketing campaign has said will be there, the sales team have said will be there. It is incredibly common.
Prose and Comms.
Welcome to Prose and Comms Engagement Unplugged. I'm Brian Rowley.
And I'm Laura Smith.
And today we've got an interesting conversation because every company says it cares about customer experience. But I would say not every company understands what that really means in overall practice. And of course, there are companies, should care about the customer. But of course, the ultimate experience is really what matters. And CX is often treated like another metric to hit a customer service function. But in reality, it touches everything from brand and marketing to operations, technology, and ultimately culture. So today we're getting into a tough question. If every company says it wants to be customer-centric, what does it actually take to build a business around the customer?
But before we dive in and introduce our guest for today, let's start with something every customer has, a customer experience pet peeve. We're not talking about the worst brand experience you've ever had. It's just the recurring little things that immediately make you lose your patience. Brian, we probably could go on about this for way too long, but let's just hit on a couple that you, in your everyday life, you experience more often than not that just drives you crazy.
Well, robocalls as a category drive me absolutely insane. There is nothing worse than having a phone call come in and you know that it's not a real person. They act as if they are a real person. And then you just get stuck in this. I immediately hang up. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I feel like they're very common right now, so it's quite obnoxious, so I would agree. But it's not even like you have a relationship with them. That's like an example where like you're not even a customer of whatever they're selling you potentially. It's
Right.
like cold calling, right?
Yeah.
So I just had an experience recently, just this past weekend, so it's very top of mind. But I had to call an airline because my email was hacked and I could automatically see that like they changed my password and whatever. So I immediately called the airline and the fraud department because when I went online, it told me where to go. It's actually probably twofold. The chat bot told me where to go, who to call, because they couldn't solve the problem. And then I called, and this gentleman was super helpful and explained the situation. So he immediately locked my account, and then he's like, "But now I need to transfer you to somebody else in a different department." Which I'm like, "Okay, but did this person have all this information I just gave you?" And he's like, "Yes, it's all in your file." Well, got transferred. I had to repeat everything I just said. And I'm like, I just gave all this information, and thankfully now I have it top of mind, but some things were like all these crazy questions, and I appreciate the security of it all, but that was just it was so long. And so forget about long. Obviously, I want to make sure my account, and they did, and they ended up clearing it up, and it was done relatively seamlessly. But as the customer, that was very frustrating.
Yeah, and you say long. There's nothing worse than you pick up the phone, you make that phone call, and you're on hold for 90 minutes, half hour, whatever the number is, right? And you constantly have the prompt that says, your call is very important to us. If my call was so important, why am I sitting here 45 minutes later waiting to speak to someone? I could go on this. It drives me insane.
But just on that note, in the same experience I had, that message said, "We are experiencing higher than normal call volume. So please, whatever, patient." But then the guy came on and seconds later. So I was like, actually, you set me up for that wasn't the experience. I was pleasantly surprised, but they're obviously just have this automated system that doesn't change with actually the levels of calls. So so that I think the one that going back to, like I said, is a little twofold was the chatbots that don't resolve your issue. It is purely just to have a chat bot to help with some navigation or problems, but it doesn't really solve the problem. And you spend quite a bit of time trying to get to a resolution, and then they just turn you over to a phone call. So what is this chatbot supposed to do?
Yeah.
Right?
I think those are all great examples that makes CX actually so interesting. I mean, a customer experience doesn't have to be dramatic, right, to change how someone feels about a brand. And sometimes it's actually the small moments that matter more, like you being pleasantly surprised that call volumes weren't higher than normal, like you get to someone right away. Today's guest actually is the perfect person for us, though, to discuss what customer experience really means. She's a certified CX leader, author, speaker, who's actually known for helping companies drive growth through better customer experiences. So please help us welcome Katie Stabler. Hi, Katie.
Welcome, Katie.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Hi.
Well, it's great to have you here. We've got a big discussion to unpack here, and we're really excited for you to be here.
We saw you cringing at some of those examples, Katie, right?
Oh, it was painful, but everything you said just makes total sense. I mean, the point that you made about how you don't have to have these big wow moments, and actually just getting the foundations and the fundamentals right is the first thing you have to do. My pet peeve, if you'd like me to share, is, I suppose, going one step before. It's when a company makes it so hard for you just to make contact in the first place. So this morning, very timely, I had a delivery not delivered, but the delivery company was saying it was delivered. So I just wanted to speak to somebody and say, look, you're saying this, I'm saying this, what's the resolution? But I must have spent 5 minutes going around in loops on their website trying to get to a chatbot and answering different questions, and it was just a nightmare. They made it so hard for a customer to get in touch with them. That is my biggest frustration in CX.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced that. But on that line, we hear, and that same company, right, is probably one that stands up and says, oh, just like every other company, we're a CX company. So when people actually make that statement and say every company is a CX company, what does that mean to you?
So I think it's like this holy grail, this aspiration that companies have, that they are customer centric. They're saying out loud and proud, we care about our customers. But what to do that actually means in reality means you have to design around your customers, you have to manage that design implementation, and it's a constant iteration. And you said it before, Brian, you said culture. For a company to be customer centric, it has to be woven so deeply into their culture. Very, very few actually reach that aspiration. They say they're there, but they're not. I mean, we can talk about why they're not, but it's a huge goal, and it's not unachievable. It's just very few companies manage it.
And a big part of what you talk about, though, it's like we want to peel back layers on the psychology behind customer experience. Because again, you're saying that a lot of companies say they are, or they want to be, or they're thriving to be, but very few are doing it. So why not? So when you think about customer experience, what do companies do to understand how people actually experience brands? Like what work is being done to truly understand the customer to better serve them?
Well, I'll answer that in two parts. So the first question you said, why not? I think fundamentally, customer experience, despite Net Promoter Score, so NPS, that was born about 22, 23 years ago by Fred Reichfield. And that was probably the time when customer experience really started to boom, when we started to take it seriously, where we had this measurement that all of a sudden could be pretty well benchmarked across companies. But that's really new for a business function. HR, ops, marketing, these functions have been around for a long time. So customer experience is like this little baby as far as a company function goes. And because it's so new, it's not properly embedded into organizations. So I think one of the reasons companies fail to be customer-centric, be a customer-led company, is because they're just not set up to be that way. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of hard work, and a lot of effort to create that culture where actually CX isn't an add-on, it isn't just a department, it isn't just a person, but actually it's a fundamental part of the business. So I think that's a big thing that we need to bear in mind when we are looking at customer experience. But when we come on to the psychology of customer experience, which is my sweet spot, I absolutely love, a lot of companies don't go to the depth that they need to when it comes to CX. We all know what customer experience is, right? We all experience it On paper, it's pretty easy. It makes common sense. But actually, customer experience is more than just words on a page. It's more than just a term. And one of the things that I like to try and support companies to understand is the customer experience chain, which in a nutshell just explains, slightly deeper level, what CX is. So yes, it's an interaction, which is where most companies start and stop. They say when a customer interacts with their company, that's where they're getting the customer experience. Yes, it's an interaction. But every single interaction creates an emotion. Whether that's a strong, deliberately designed emotion, or whether it's a subdued, completely accidental emotion, every interaction still has an emotion. You're either happy, sad, angry, frustrated, or meh. And those emotions, they are what create memory. So this is backed by research, backed by neuroscience, backed by psychology. Emotions create memory. The stronger the emotion, the bigger the memory. The more of these that happen, the more the memory compounds. So all of these emotions that we have as customers, they are sticking in our mind as memories. And we all know that these memories are not black and white. It's not a photo. It changes over time. It's manipulated by different things that happen that connect to that company. And ultimately, the last link in that chain, so we've got interaction, we've got emotion, we've got memory. The last link is perception. So those memories fade, change, manipulate, and they become our perception of that customer experience. And that is customer experience. But most companies don't look into the depth of that. They don't train, they don't support the organization to understand that. And they just stay at that interaction phase, with or without the emotion, with or without the memory, with or without the perception. And that's a fundamental that I think all companies need to understand.
As you do talk to companies, because in your role, and obviously you have a book on this and all that, and I feel like, how do people respond to that? Do you feel like when you are consulting, you're talking to organizations, do you feel like that resonates and that they understand that that's a shift in the way they're doing business and thinking about doing business with potential customers? Or do you find it to be people's reaction is, oh, in theory, that sounds great, but what do I do with that?
A bit of both. I mean, put it this way, the companies that I'm working with, they chose to work with me. So they know a bit about me and they've obviously got the intention to develop and to grow. So they want this kind of thought leadership. They want to understand more and they want to improve. So generally, yes, they're very perceptive and they want to look at it in a different way. You also ask, what do we do with this? How do we translate this into something that can actually change and support a movement in the business? And that's what comes next, really, and that all depends on organization to organization as to how we would approach that. But generally, people kind of sit in the rooms and you can see their eyes widening and going like, yeah, because it all makes sense. None of this is unsurprising. It's just, we just don't talk about it in this way. We don't look at it in this way. And we certainly don't work in a way that takes any of this on board. We're not deliberately designing for emotion, for memory, for perception. We're just designing for that moment. So yeah, most companies kind of have that light bulb moment when this goes on. It's like, holy moly. Yeah, we need to do this. We need to get on board with this.
Yeah, the thing that I love about that is how many times do you sit in a room and, when we talk about CX, we do default back to like, what was our NPS score versus like, how many people did we absolutely thrill or how many people did we actually infuriate, right? Like we never take that approach because that's the emotion, right? That is the piece to it that actually is a result of that very first interaction. And we're always having the conversation that, and I do believe that everybody in the organization is responsible for the overall customer experience because at any point, any person, any role within the organization can ultimately be responsible for emotion, right? For memories, and ultimately the perception, right? That's driven after that interaction takes place.
Totally. And I think that's the magic, Brian. Right at the beginning of this conversation, we're talking about, what is a customer experience company? What's a customer-centric company? And I truly believe that the ones who can tag themselves with that badge are exactly what you've just said. They're the companies where every single person in that organization understands that they in some way have an impact on the end customer experience. No matter who they are, no matter what they do, something will ultimately knock back onto the customer experience. And it's those companies who have the teams that understand that, and who, when they are making decisions, when they are talking in boardrooms, when they are designing policies and process, not just journey maps, they're thinking about the customer all the way through.
Yeah, because that is customer centricity. I mean, that's a term that is overused all the time, but I think you just clearly defined that, right? That truly is what customer centricity is actually all about.
Absolutely. And look, we can't be naive in the fact that to do that is awesome. And if you can do that, great. There are always going to be barriers, though. There is always going to be that conflict moment where the best thing for the customer is A, but the best thing for the business is B. And there are going to be people in the organization battling both for A and B. And there has to be compromise, because we're all businesses, right? We all have to make profit. And, sometimes there will be compromise. But again, it's where those conversations still are fully grounded in the understanding of the impact on the customer experience. It's not always about doing absolutely everything the customer would definitely want. It's about just making sure that your decisions are thoughtful around the customer.
But you bring up a good point, though, because, I think to truly be customer centric, the business has to be willing to give up in certain areas. Like there may be a feature that is a horrible user experience, but that feature is a revenue generator for the organization. If you're truly customer centric, you will fix that experience in order to better serve the customer. And that may mean there's a revenue or profit, there's some kind of hit financially. And I think if you really, you're not going to go and rebuild your business holistically, I guess. I guess it just goes back to like challenging those organizations. If they're not willing to make changes because it does have a financial impact, then you can't call yourself customer centric, because you've been given feedback that these certain things don't work, or these certain things don't make sense or benefit the customer's experience. So you must face that too in conversations around like, what point do we make a call?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I don't think there are many companies that can actually say they are customer centric, because there are always these internal battles. So, I mean, even because what you just said, Laura, it makes total sense. And gosh, yes, if a company that I was working with was always doing the right thing for the customer, dream come true. In fact, I probably wouldn't be working with them because they've got it nailed already. But the reality is, I work mostly with customer experience leaders. So normally the people who are bringing me into the business are CX managers, CX directors, or people who informally are just looking after CX. And, gosh, they care. They are passionate. They want to be doing all of the right things when it comes to CX. They see all of the problem areas. They're working with the different departments to try and hopefully, fix these problem areas. But this is where the biggest challenge comes in, right? Is you've got these different departments that care, that get it, that want to make a change. But that change might negatively impact another department. And the other department, for whatever reason, might be scared. It might cost them money. It might show some failure areas that they don't want to have shown. And it's that internal conflict which stops progress in organizations. So when we talk about culture, it's not just a culture of being customer centric. It's a culture of so much, not being scared of failure, being more comfortable to open up to areas of problems, to sometimes focus on loss leaders and know that eventually that'll be a profit generator. But all of these different conflicts that every organization experiences tends to just be another little chip going against customer experience. And the more you talk about this, the more you can see why customer experience is so hard to really embed in culture, because again, while it's common sense, while it feels like, yeah, just do the right thing for the customer, in reality, in business, it just is not that easy.
But I think the other side to that too is companies also have to be honest. Like the example that we gave at the very beginning that I mentioned, where you're sitting on hold for 2 hours and, you're constantly being told, we're sorry, you're very important to us. Like there's a decision that's being made there that wait time is an acceptable amount of time. Like we all have all the metrics. We all know how long the queues are. We all know all of that stuff. So there does get to be that point where the company is making a decision to say that is a tolerable amount for us even though it may not be for the end user. So those are things that I think there's a level of honesty that companies need to have too, to say, okay, we realize we're probably going to make a couple of people really angry in this process, but we're actually okay with that.
Yeah. Or what I think is often more likely is there's this huge gap between what customers feel, their reality of the experience, and what the company believes that customer experience to be. And that gap is for so many reasons, inefficient data or data that just isn't being used accurately. It's due to lack of customer feedback. There's an old statistic, I don't think it's accurate anymore, but it was where 1 in 26 customers complain, the rest just leave. Whilst that statistic might not be accurate, it's still a good representation of what actually happens in the world. Most customers who are unhappy, they don't complain, they don't leave feedback, leave feedback, they just don't come back again. There's bias internally in organizations as to what we think the customer experience is. So that company who's got that 2-hour wait time, yes, they may well have said, do you know what, we're fine with that. Or it might be they just don't really look deeply at the impact that has on the customer experience, and they don't think it's a big deal. And often when I work with companies, their reality of what they think the customer experience is and the actual customer experience, there's a big gaping gap in the middle, and showing that, illuminating that gap is usually kind of the first step in kicking into action.
Because I think people, you only have so much patience to kind of solve the problem. And I think one of those situations, and going back to something you talked about earlier, Katie, is about like when you can't figure out how to get in touch with somebody, and I won't name this company, not that whatever, but it's a ride sharing type company. And when something bad happens and you can't figure out how to complain, it became an issue. So at one point I had to take it to Twitter, and that's just not me normally, but in order to get them to respond, you have to then take it to social media, tagging them and outing them really, and shining light on the fact that there is this fundamental problem. And then of course they respond to that, but don't make the customer don't make it so difficult for them to, because I would have left. I mean, they actually were quick to respond and everything was resolved just fine. And I only did that because someone had said to me, oh yeah, if you want them to resolve anything, you need to call them out on social media because then they respond to it. So you're staffing a social team, but you're not staffing a team to manage inbound emails or a chatbot or whatever else. It's very, very frustrating, but you're going to hear about it. So if people aren't quiet.
Yeah, that's appalling. That's so bad. I actually know a few companies who basically, it feels like that's a policy. Like you say, they won't do anything unless, of course, it suddenly becomes visible and then they'll act, which is obviously so in the opposite direction of what we're talking about. It's like the worst of the worst.
But Laura, I guess on that example that you just gave, did your perception of the company change throughout that process? So you were obviously very frustrated, which led you to social media. Once you actually got that response from them in the end and they resolved whatever it was, did the handling of that change anything to do with your perception?
Yeah. I mean, I think if they never got back to me, I would just probably have then opted for another ride sharing company to use, and honestly, and I already had another one in my, that I use or switch up on, but that did give me I don't have to now go call this other, use the other company all the time. I'm willing to give them a try because there was a financial, they owed me money back kind of thing. So that would have been really annoying. And I probably wouldn't have done business with them again if they didn't follow through. And really, in taking my side. Now, whether they thought I was right or wrong, they at least gave the customer the benefit of the doubt in that situation. So, yeah, I think the outcome of that made me give them a little bit of leeway.
Yeah,
I still use them.
Yeah, it's interesting. Katie, during sort of some of the prep that we have done for this, we've heard you say that marketing actually shapes the promise, but CX is actually where that promise gets delivered. And I'm just curious there in that, because that I find really fascinating. And I think this is an interesting part of the conversation. But where do you actually see the biggest disconnect between what companies say and what customers actually are experiencing?
So in the world of B2C, I actually don't see it's significantly standing out. Don't get me wrong, there are a few companies here and there that I've worked with where that has been the case. But actually where it's more prolific is the world of B2B. So it's obviously a very competitive market. You're in B2B, you're typically tendering. So the whole early marketing and sales piece, it's very much, we can do everything. We're shiny, we're sexy, we're going to give you what you want. And then when that translates into actually onboarding the customer and then delivering that service and having a BAU of service delivery, that's where, unfortunately, I see a lot of organizations not following through on the promises that the marketing campaign has said will be there, the sales team have said will be there. And, there's a lot of reasons as to why that happens, but it is incredibly common. And then, of course, especially in the B2B environment, you're in a contract, you're stuck. And this even applies to B2C. And I almost mentioned it in your car sharing example, Laura. But there's a thing called captive customers. It's a term that I coined where, for many reasons, you might be stuck with an organization, whether it's because it's convenient, whether it's because it's cheap, whether it's because it's the only one near you, or whether it's because you're in a contract. And then when you're captive to an organization and a company knows that, unfortunately, the customer experience can really kind of waver.
That's so true, Brian. Think about. I mean, we inherited some marketing tools and contracts when we came on board, and we have to continue on with them because we're in a contract, and this is the only tool we have that does this. And here we go. But actually, the service is not. It's poor.
Make the best of it, right? That you're forced.
Totally.
Yeah.
And in these environments, even when maybe the contract is up and you are in a position to move, sometimes it's just not that easy because, again, legacy systems, sometimes it can be more expensive and way harder to actually change to another provider than just try and make the best of what you've got. And it's a difficult position as a consumer to be in that position.
I will say, though, that one of the things that's really interesting and one of the things that I've always referred back to is when you get in and sit around a table, because oftentimes within these discussions, you've got a table full of executives that are having a conversation. And if you have the problem that you're trying to solve for, and you always ask the question, how does it impact the customer? Usually you can get to a better answer. And I don't think people ask that question enough. They try to solve the problem for the business without thinking. And if you interject that, what impact does that have on the customer? It does change the conversation every single time. Oh,
yeah, I totally agree. And I think so one of the tactics that I would often use in an organization to do that is have a customer chair in the room. So physically an empty chair which represents the customer. And you would normally need a customer advocate to be always pointing at that chair saying, okay, but what's the customer going to say to that? What's the customer going to say? I mean, it's even better and a lot braver if you can actually have a customer in that room, which I do see does happen. But normally people are a bit more comfortable with the customer chair than the actual customer. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Brian. It does change the conversation because when people start to think, nobody doesn't want to give the customer a good experience. Nobody's against that. It's just the realities of doing it. But herein is the problem. If you have to put a customer chair in the room, or if you have to be asking that question all the time, it demonstrates that company just isn't there yet on customer centricity, because you shouldn't have to be asking that. It should just be intrinsically part of the conversation. And this is why, again, a lot of companies aren't yet where they're planning to be. And it's a growth journey. It's not that they're not going to get there, but these things are not as natural as we would hope that they would be.
And I have a question because, Brian, you brought up earlier, we haven't really talked about the measurement and the tools and the data people or companies are using. Like NPS, I hear a lot of call BS on that as a measure or the only measure. I think it's sometimes skewed, like where executives take that to a place where that's the end all be all. So talk to us about, what do you recommend as those data points when you are working with a company to see, like, are customers happy?
Yeah, NPS is a big one, and I don't think we can ever really get away from that conversation. I know if I ever put a social media post out that mentions NPS, which I'm reluctant to do because personally I find it a boring topic, but social media just goes mental. Everybody loves to talk about NPS. And I think it is because it's so Marmite. And for anyone listening, Net Promoter Score, NPS, and it's a measure of loyalty. But you're right, Laura, over the years, it's changed from what it was intended. It can get very heavily manipulated, and it's not really a strong benchmark as it once was. However, to caveat that, I am a big advocate that really it doesn't matter what metric you use, it's how you use it. If you are just a company that's chasing the score, that's focusing on the number, it doesn't matter what metric you're using it wrong. What you need to be doing, of course, is looking at what is driving that measurement, what is driving that number, and how you deploy that in the organization makes a big difference as well. It's just not just a matter of chucking a survey out and thinking that'll do the trick. But really, when it comes to measures, I work with organizations in quite a bespoke way to identify what are your outcomes and what are your customer outcomes. And then we create metrics that deliberately hit on those. And we might use some of the traditional ones like NPS because they might be really serious about benchmarking externally. So at the moment, that's pretty much the way you have to go. But it would never just be NPS alone. We might use customer satisfaction scores. We might use customer effort score. In fact, customer effort score, which as the name suggests, just tell you how easy was it to interact with a company. Customer effort score is actually known to be a better metric for loyalty than NPS, but a lot of companies don't know and don't utilize that. And we might use these big ones because for a lot of companies, it's a bit of a comfort blanket to be familiar with these metrics. But then I'll always work to deploy more experiential metrics that do measure sentiment, that do measure emotion, that measure specific parts of the journey, which are particularly important to the customer or the company. And again, you can almost measure anything when it comes to a bespoke measurement, but it's how you use that measure. It's what you do with it in the organization. It's how you communicate it to everybody so they know what's going on. They know how they can influence it. And I think that's the crucial part. Less about what it is and more about how you use it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And do you find that are some companies willing to have like customer councils? Because I know some organizations have that, right? Whether do they have big customers, they kind of sit in this council and they do engage on an ongoing basis to gather feedback and all that. And some of that might be more anecdotal than it is, a data point, but that's okay. Do you find that to be a good, activity for a company to run?
Totally. And I love that. Anything that you're actually getting information from the horse's mouth, as it were, the better. I mean, you still have to take some of it with a bit of bias because, it depends on who you're speaking to, what experience they've had, like how good of a day they've had that day.
Right.
So there's so many things to factor in. Yeah.
Totally true.
But it is. I mean, this is why customer satisfaction is a really hard score to use because you can have two customers who go through the exact same experience, but one has been sat in the sunshine all day, they've had a glass of rosé, happy, happy, happy. The other have had, school holidays, they've got 6 kids running around their feet, they're stressed out of their minds, less happy. So, all of this data, you have to be conscientious how you use it. But that's a great point about the customer councils, Laura, because actually the best companies who get the best data and therefore the best insight are the companies who use multiple different data sources. So yes, use your customer journey mapping. Yes, have your relationship surveys, get your customer councils, talk to your frontline staff. Outside of your customers, they are the next best people who know what the customer experience is and feels like. Customer forums. There is just so many different avenues. And one of the first kind of diagnostics I'll do with an organization is give them a big list of all of these different inputs and get them to tick, which ones do you use? Very few of them have more than 5. And that's where you're really limiting your information source. And especially now with the age of AI and the technology that we're using, getting this data is not that hard anymore. But we're definitely on a data growth journey.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the other side to that too is people need to think in capturing those data points, right? What's the minimal amount of impact to their customers? Because I think in gathering that data, there's a CX element to that as well. There's nothing worse than being surveyed and then 6 months later or a year later, you're getting a survey again, nothing's changed and you're surveying again. So I do think that as part of capturing and collecting those data points, that should be somewhat as much as possible seamless to the customer, and you should be able to get that in a way that it just doesn't impact them, because that in itself can create a terrible customer experience.
Absolutely. And that's why so one of the technology growth that we have seen is in conversational analytics and sentiment collection. And gosh, I couldn't advocate for that more strongly, because there you are getting direct, informal feedback time and time and time again for your customer. They're giving you it organically. You're not having to ask for it. You're not asking for surveys. They are just telling you in the moment what they like, what they don't like. You can hear the frustration. You can hear the happiness. If any company isn't using conversation analytics to some form right now, I'd be asking why. Like, you absolutely should be. But on the other point that you just had there, Brian, about, asking for feedback 6 months later, asking for it again, and you've seen that there has been no change. I mean, that's the importance of a properly structured, closed loop feedback program in your organization. It is no good asking your customer for their feedback and not first acknowledging it, thanking them for it, if there is something to be done about it, telling them what they've done. And this can be micro or macro. You can be speaking to every individual customer and thanking them and giving them a bit of feedback. Or it could be at a larger level where, maybe there's a newsletter that goes out once a quarter to say, look, guys, you've told us this, we've listened, these are the changes we've made. Please continue to give us your feedback. We really appreciate it, yada, yada, yada. But again, you don't often see companies being that proactive.
Right. I think it's starting with the internal too, right? Companies do employee engagement surveys. Like, do employees see actions taken? And if they're not happening to the own employee experience, it's not going to happen to the customer experience. So that's a true sign of how much that company really cares about either. But I don't want to, you mentioned AI. So of course we're going to talk about AI, because that's always what we talk about in every conversation.
Sorry.
Right. But let's talk about it as it relates to how do companies think about empathy and humanity as they are trying to automate. Because I think if someone thinks about AI from a customer experience perspective, I think they're immediately go to it's about like replacing agents with an AI chatbot. And that's really not what it's about, because I think that could be if you do it effectively. But really, it isn't about taking away the human side of it, or it shouldn't be. It's because the AI could be how you drive efficiencies in running the business versus like using with data and analytics and all that. But how would you recommend, or how do you talk about this with organizations? Because I think sometimes the gut reaction is, I'll just get AI tools that will just do this for us, and removing that human element to it.
Yeah, and do you know what? I mean, actually, there is a reality that the human workforce is reducing, and there's some pretty scary stats out there from a customer service perspective about what that level of reduction will look like over the next 5 to 10 years. But I'm skeptical about some of those changes. And you're right, actually a lot of the changes that are happening at the moment when it comes to customer experience tend to sit on the customer service side of things. And yes, it can be an increased use of chatbot, things that I just mentioned a second ago, conversation analytics, fully automated quality assurance, which means, your QA team is massively reduced because that manual effort of listening to and scoring calls is now done 100% by a computer. It's like such a time saver. So there are big areas where definitely workforce is being reduced. More so what I see though is actually agents are being helped by this technology. So a lot of companies are utilizing transcription so that at the end of a call, obviously the agent doesn't have to take the time to write the notes, it's just automatically transcribed. Or in better knowledge bases, so agents are just being pushed the information straight away that they need. They're not having to go and search for it. They know it's accurate this time. So there's loads of things that are being utilized to help at the moment rather than replace, which is great. But ultimately, from a AI usage perspective, my biggest piece of advice to any organization is make sure your technology strategy is heavily intertwined with your customer experience strategy. I mean, that goes actually customer experience strategy for every different important strategy in the business. They all need to be connected, but definitely AI and CX, because anything obviously customer facing technology wise is going to affect your customer. You need to make sure your customer experience leader, whoever that is part of that discussion, and that your strategy is really well thought out. And at the moment, we talked about silos at the beginning of this conversation. I still think there's a lot of catastrophic silos where the IT, the tech department are making decisions around AI usage and the customer experience department has got nothing to do with it. I'll give you an example. I was sat having a chat with a lady who leads customer experience at a big UK energy company. And she said she'd gone into work one morning and found that there was a brand new customer-facing chatbot that they had no idea was coming. They hadn't had any part of the design or creation in. And chaos. And you just think, how? How was that decision made? How has that not been a bigger discussion in the company? But these things happen all the time and they need to stop happening. I think that's the crucial thing when we're talking about customer-centric. AI, doesn't matter what it is, anything, there needs to continue to be that conversation with your CX leader about any changes that will affect the customer.
Well, and I think more of a focus on just the efficiency factor and more on how does it help? Like, because, I was on a call earlier today and we were talking about, some of the call prep that is being done and also some recordings that are done during calls and how the AI tool can actually capture some of like confusion from someone on the other end that the actual support person may not be able to, or salesperson may not. So it's almost like an honesty check to be able to say, I know you are hoping that the customer said this or felt this way, but the reality is this AI tool is saying that's not the case. So now maybe reach out again and just create and close that loop where there seemed to be confusion. It can be a better customer experience. And I think if you look at it that way versus it saved me a ton of time and I can jump onto the next call, that's not really its goal. Its goal is to try to do that plus, but if you put the CX side to it, I think there's a lot of benefit there.
Yeah, I love the way you put that. And again, the hope is that more and more organizations will start to think that way. I think the reality is, as you said, efficiencies. And exactly what you've just said, those things don't have to be at odds. So if the customer experience is great, if you're doing all the right things, efficiencies will come. Maybe it looks like this upfront effort, but in the end, there will be less. There's less repetition, there's less resources involved, there's less opportunity for frustration and complaint. These all eventually create efficiencies rather than just going straight in for, let's save money.
Right. And like those efficiencies can make the customer experience better. Like we might be solving the problem faster, so that it can have that dual outcome, which is...
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I remember working for a credit company many, many years ago, and we deployed a big customer journey mapping program. It's something that they'd never really seen before. And when we mapped out some real life customer journeys, using data to show from like one person's lifetime experience with this company, it was appallingly scary. The amount of duplicated letters, the amount of duplicated calls. And from a customer experience perspective, you could see clearly this was shocking and this shouldn't be happening. But from a cost perspective, you could also see how incredibly detrimental and wasteful and inefficient to the company this experience was. So yeah, we're looking for savings because of course every company would, why wouldn't they? But actually we're looking to improve the customer experience, which will create those savings anyway. So there will be efficiencies and it all leads to the greater good of whichever perspective your C-suite is looking to, whether it's customer centricity, whether it's growth, whether it's profit, customer experience always helps those two.
Absolutely. Okay, this has been a fascinating discussion, but we need to move on to start our next segment, which is the hot seat.
Brace yourself.
It's time for the questions. Pull up to the table. Our guest today is the one and only Katie Stabler. She's here to bring the fire and turn up the heat. Welcome, Katie, to the hot seat.
Thank you,
Wow,
Joey.
I love that.
That was fun. We never know what it's going to be, Katie. So Joey just surprises us all. That was a good one.
Love that.
That was a good
I'm
one.
definitely going to be sharing that constantly.
All right, so we're going to have a little fun and get your gut reactions. No pressure. We're going to basically going to go through some myth busters around CX. So we're going to give you some common statements about customer experience, and you're just going to give us your quick take on whether it's a myth or it actually holds up. So you can say one word answer, you can elaborate on it, but we have a few we're going to go through. So just whatever your gut reaction is, let us know. Okay?
Super.
The first one is CX is everyone's job.
Absolutely true. Yes.
Customers want to be wowed.
Myth. Wowing is always nice, but customers just want to trust the organization that they're buying a service or product from.
A great product can overcome a bad experience.
Yes. I mean, I'm saying that with a scowly face, but yes, it's true, it can.
I think we've covered this one, but NPS is the best way to measure customer experience.
Does that answer your question?
I mean, I love the noises, right? It's whatever that gut reaction is. Okay, last but not least, the best customer experiences are the ones customers barely notice.
And that's interesting because yes, can be, but going back to the CX chain we talked about, if you don't notice it, harder to remember. So yes and no, I'm sitting on the fence.
Katie, this has been amazing. Such a great conversation. We love all your insights, and thank you so much for being here.
So thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation. Lovely to chat to you guys.
Thanks, Katie.
So, Laura, I think, one of the things that sort of stuck out for me is, and I think this just rings true even more as a result of this, is it doesn't matter actually where you are. There's always room for improvement on CX. And I would challenge that I don't think there's a company out there that could say that they're perfect at that. And if they are, we would love to have you on here to be able to talk about that. But I think the most important thing is when customers are looking at the overall customer experience chain, remember, interaction is only one part of it, because every interaction creates an emotion, every emotion creates a memory, and every memory becomes a perception.
Yeah, that's definitely a great takeaway that I think a lot of people will benefit from to use as an evaluation and to think about the fact that there is even this chain. The other thing I would say that I wrote down, because to challenge ourselves as marketers and at our organization, is looking at or being more diligent about conversational feedback and listening and analyzing conversation, as well as that customer effort score. I don't know if we look at that, and that's something that I feel like it could be easily forgotten or not part of the mix of the data piece of it. That is super important. So tons of great insights she shared, and something we can carry back to our own everyday, but also for our listeners to do the same.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thanks for listening. And most importantly, if you like what you heard today, be sure to follow us. And if you want to hear more from Katie Stabler, you can find her on LinkedIn.